everyone. Can everyone hear me? I'm assuming so. Okay, well, so we have our next panel coming back from lunch, and the title of this panel, which I really love, is Tending Time. And because so much of these conversations have really danced around or maybe even cheek to cheek with the idea of the poetic as really central to how we're thinking about metaphor. I love the alliteration for sure, but that we might tend to time as we would maybe tend to like a garden or a baby with a certain kind of attention and care, I think points really to the essentiality of a kind of symbiotic relationship between time, music, and metaphor. And so I'm really looking forward to hearing how these panelists will think about time in relation to these conversations. We're going to move to our final presentation with Jason Robinson, In the Room Together, Telematics, Corporeality, and Ambivalence.
Thank you, Jessica, and my deepest thanks to Nina and Daniel and everyone else involved in organizing this fantastic symposium. Thanks for putting all of this together. Also, I just want to acknowledge some friends of mine from a long time ago that are in the participants list. It's really great to see you listed there. And hello to all my new friends now. And there's one person in the list, at least one that has been a telematic collaborator of mine as well. So hi, Michael. Greetings from Amherst, Massachusetts, from land taken from the Pecumtuck people before, during, and after King Philip's War of the 17th century. I was introduced to telematics around the year 2000 when I performed in a project that included participants in Canada, Austria, Australia, and the United States performing in real time via the internet. While the sound involved a delay or latency of around 2 seconds between locations, the video contained a whopping 5 seconds or more between my location in San Diego and that of the event organizers in Vancouver, thus producing a cognitively jarring discrepancy between hearing and sight. Largely improvised, the music was interactive and responsorial. I would offer a musical gesture. 2 seconds later, a distant collaborator would hear that gesture and respond. And then 2 seconds after that, I would hear and respond to their gesture. The delayed video was pretty much useless, but the audio from my distant collaborators was clean and pristine, and was perhaps even better than if I had been performing alongside them in their performance spaces. For me, this began a 20-some-odd year exploration of telematics and the uncanny feeling that I might be, quote, in the same room as my distant collaborators. The name telematics comes from the French neologism telematique, coined by Simone Nora and Alan Menck in 1978. Today, telematics refers to multi-site network performance over the internet involving performers distributed across different locations making music or other expressive forms in real time. While low-tech options for this have existed for many years and continue to evolve, telephones, Skype, Zoom, corporate teleconferencing platforms, other options with higher quality sound and lower latency have emerged over time, especially for those amenable to programming and command line computing. These include the open source software Jacktrip, developed by Chris Chafe and others at Stanford, or Jamulus, JamKazam, and SoundJack, to name a few. As the COVID-19 pandemic unfolded in 2020, interest in telematics exploded. Group music making was rendered nearly impossible by the need to socially distance. Not only was there a widespread shift to live streamed concerts broadcast from venues without audiences, but the basics of rehearsing together in a room became risky. Thus emerged a need that connected musicians, technologists, and researchers who had already been working in telematics with an enormous new contingent that included everyone from K through 12 choir and band directors to community music groups, professional ensembles, all eager to find ways to make music together at a distance. Activity on the Jacktrip users' email list spiked as more and more people endeavored to use the software, and developers offered new free plug-and-play options that harnessed the high-fidelity, low-latency sound capabilities of Jacktrip and other platforms. Sonobus is one example of this. Describing the full scope and historical development of telematics is much too large for this brief presentation. That's a story for another time. For me, however, the flurry of energy around telematics prompted by the COVID-19 pandemic brought into sharp relief fascinating ways that network performance implicates embodiment, what I refer to as corporeality in the title of my talk, while also seeming to offer a way beyond the body. Or put differently, telematics allows us to be, quote, in the same room together, even if we are in fact distributed across different rooms. It's like we're in the same room together, a joyful declaration I've heard on several occasions after playing a song or improvising together telematically. The metaphor of being together in the room has recurred throughout my work in telematics. I'm organizing and producing telematic events, performing on and composing for these events, developing the local site technical means to carry out these kinds of projects, navigating and solving problems with institutional Internet 2 access and firewall issues, and so forth. I acknowledge some risk in using this kind of first-person perspective as the basis of what follows. Others with experience in telematics will inevitably have different perspectives. I welcome these and hope that what follows encourages conversations about experiences and assumptions revealed through telematics. As I've written elsewhere, the issue of believability is common to networked performance. And by believability, I mean, number one, the extent to which performers distributed across different sites feel like they're able to make music together without too many limitations imposed by technical elements inherent to networking via the internet. And two, the extent to which audiences feel that they're experiencing a genuine performance. What do you do about latency? That question. For most performers and audiences, the question of latency, which to varying degrees is indeed an always present component in telematics, reveals ontological assumptions about musical performance, about listening and responding, about aesthetic priorities. While it is true that communication over the internet will always be limited by the speed of light, fiber optic cables function with light, and that latency will inevitably be a function of distance and computer processing, among other things, it is not true that all musicians working in telematics rely on rhythmic synchrony for the viability of their music. In an interview I conducted with telematics pioneer Pauline Oliveros several years ago, Oliveros offered that the question of latency is often, quote, born out of people who are thinking about keeping a beat. Believability in this sense is the degree to which people can play together in time. Many telematics projects focus on this, and musicians have indeed found ways to groove together at a distance. People develop ways to create a sense of rhythmic synchrony at a distance, even when latency is present. And perhaps this is one way of thinking about tending time, or what the Jamaican dub poet John Binta Breeze calls time gone. What intrigues me for the context of this presentation is the degree to which telematic projects engender a sense of being together in the same room as distant collaborators. Or in the words of Miller Puckett, quote, if you see someone on a screen, does that mean the person is really thousands of miles away or just in a nearby closet? While traditional co-located performance assumes that ensemble members will be corporeally present in the same room, telematics assumes that corporeality occurs at a distance, that presence, in the words of Oliveros, becomes telepresence. Our bodily orientations to the spaces that we inhabit, either together in the same room in co-located performance or in our own rooms in telematics, anchor music making to spaces and our corporeal embodied relationships to those spaces, even if some spaces are at a distance and piped through a networked connection. In traditional co-located performance, on the other hand, our bodies are subject to the acoustic vicissitudes of the spaces within which we make music. The reverb, decay, and frequency responses of our spaces shape the ways that we hear each other and interact musically. A play on the title of English percussionist Eddie Prevost's book, No Sound is Innocent, No Room is Innocent in musical performance. What kind of room, therefore, do we inhabit during telematic performance? How is musical interactivity shaped by the nature of this room? While we are accustomed to performances that occur in rooms like Carnegie Hall or Minton's Playhouse, for example, I contend that the room of telematic performance is much more akin to a recording studio than it is a traditional venue. Close miking used in recording studios is the preferred method for capturing a performer's sound during telematic performance. This approach mitigates feedback issues with monitors and front of house sound amplification as well as sound bleed from other performers, thus giving more discrete mixing options to the other networked locations. It also reduces the transmission of local acoustics to remote sites. The local room does not become the networked room. Moreover, close miking captures micro sounds of individual performers, allowing sounds that normally go unnoticed in the acoustic wash of traditional performance spaces to be audible across the network. Taken as a whole, these peculiar properties of telematic performance make it more similar to performing and recording in a studio setting rather than performance in a traditional venue. Because of this, the metaphor of being in the same room together during telematics possesses a kind of ambivalence. And here I'm thinking of Homi Bhabha's notion of ambivalence in colonial stereotypes. Our imaginative room is not a stage in a traditional sense, but a recording studio with isolation booths, likely with little room for an audience. My hunch is that the room metaphor operates with different intentions. It endeavors to measure successful telematic corporeality against the acoustic properties of traditional co-located performance in venues. As such, the metaphor reveals assumptions and priorities of traditional co-located performance, but draws from music making and recording studios in situations in which the room is carefully manufactured by monitor mixes, the use of audio effects, and more. Thus, the roominess and the togetherness of telematics is much more than a simple reproduction of what it is like to be in the room together, but is instead a complex experience resonating across various pre-existing and imaginative modalities. And as a small coda, given more than 2 years of social distancing and a kind of forced telematic existence, ultimately, we may not want to forego the actual act of being in the room together, of being corporeally co-present, of breathing the same air, sensing the same vibrations, those physical movements within the column of air that we bodily share. For me, telematics reveals ways that music brings us together.
Thanks so much, Jason. This is wonderful. It seems to me that as much as we've all talked about tending time, we've also talked so much about tending to the body as really integral to our experiences of time and music. So we have about 10 minutes for questions. And as you all are raising your electronic hands, I just want to remind us that we strive to promote an open, honest, and mutually supportive exchange between all symposium participants. So we ask that all approach one another and the shared conversation with kindness, curiosity, and respect for the different positions we all bring to the metaphorical table, as well as the accommodations we are implementing to ensure everyone is able to participate. So does anyone have any questions? And you're also welcome to put questions in the chat if you have any. Well, while we're waiting for people to, oh, nope, okay. I don't want to take up the time. Okay, Carlos, it seems like you have a question. Please feel free to unmute yourself.
Thank you. This has been a wonderful panel and a wonderful day. I don't know if I'm supposed to ask questions as a listening poet, but I will, since no one raised their hands. Sophie, this might be a question, comment. I'm thinking the terms, the way you recover the Hikeh and the Hida to talk about the dead metaphor as a concept that erases its trace. I think that is so important in poetry today. I'm thinking an equivalent, a parallel way to I'm going to say, to foreground the artifice and implicate the speaker instead of hiding behind the artifice. I feel like, I wonder if you see those connections, the way you were thinking about rhythm in music. I feel like you can also think about rhythm in poetry today, or ways of foregrounding the form and implicating the speaker in this conundrum. I think it's fascinating.
Yes, thank you so much also for this link. I think it's really important that you highlight that we can see this in poetry as well, because actually, as I was drawing on Ricoeur and on Derrida, they do distinguish, or specifically Ricoeur distinguishes between a poetic metaphor and the discursive metaphor, which he mainly relates to philosophical discourse. So when he speaks of the dead metaphor, he actually thinks a lot of, or about the link between metaphysics and metaphor that we had as a question already earlier today. But I do think that it is important to kind of relate this back to poetry and to language as well. And I think this idea of reviving it is actually can be seen as a creative process. So this is where I do absolutely agree with you that there is a definite link between poetic and discursive metaphor.
Yeah, and the space that you open by seeing this as a dynamic relationship.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks for that question, Carlos. I think the next hand was Ellen's.
Hi, thanks so much for these papers. This is a question for both Dylan and Jason. It's not really about time so much as bodies. I'm curious about the way that your practices, Dylan, in your case, this learning of Hulkamelim over many years with this complete refiguration of your sense of your body and language. And Jason, this sustained practice of projecting one's body into cyberspace, in live performance. They're very different practices, obviously, but they both in some way are altering practices, physically, mentally, ontologically altering practices. And I wonder if you would have a little bit more to say about, Dylan, what has this done to you? What has it done to your English speaking?
What has it done to my English speaking? That's a great question. I mean, I think I can answer it better from the reorientation of body than maybe what has it done to my English speaking. Well, I mean, it certainly makes me reconsider the ways in which we, commonly understand, or I commonly understand the words I use, just really fundamentally, and the ways that those words convey sense through sound and through when I speak them, the kind of the feelingness of speaking any language or using language in my writing. And I think it's been there's no question for me that learning Hulkamelim has coincided with my development of a poetics within my writing, right? As I move to the level of the word and to time and temporality that words occupy on the page, there's also this move towards how the time that language takes when I'm speaking in Hulkamelim, and the ways that multiple things are communicated, through single words sometimes, or well, I mean, one of the funny things is that there's a certain economy of speaking in Hulkamelim that isn't necessarily true of other indigenous languages, even very languages that are close to us, like Kwakwakiwak or further north. And that economy, we joke about that as having a bit of cultural consistency. You ask an elder how they're doing, and they say, "Lee." So, I'm okay. Right? It's very sort of soft spoken, or not needing to share a lot. Or when you're sharing something, you're sharing it really concisely. And so my language teacher also always says, don't use it, for all that I talk about detail, the detail is actually held in the words rather than many, 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 many words. And so that's maybe an interesting contradiction that I find in maybe what I'm talking about here from a perspective of using English or writing English, and what happens when I'm using Hulkamelim. Yeah, that's just top of my head answer. Thanks, Ellen, for the question.
That was really interesting, Dylan. It was getting me thinking about Ellen's question in another way. The act of extending one's body across these kind of networked connections can happen in multiple modalities. One is sound and one is sight, the visual kind of representation. And I think maybe in the details of the sound, which isn't explained, there can be a lot of bodily presence contained in those sounds. The point I was trying to make in the paper about telematics being a bit more like a recording studio than a reverberant space in a traditional venue is getting at that a little bit. The close miking techniques that many people use in telematics allow you to project the sound of the body in ways that don't always communicate in reverberant traditional co-located spaces. That's one way of starting to address your question, Ellen. The other one makes me think a bit about, Pauline was quite a genius when it came to telematics. I don't know how many people knew the composer and improviser Pauline Oliveros. I'm recalling a conversation I had with her many years ago where she was kind of giggling with excitement, telling me about all of her interests in having avatars as visual representations in telematic performance. And I think she was an early adopter of that. What was it called? Like Real Life or something like that. There was an early Second Life, the early sort of online kind of context for building a presence. She was an early adopter of that. And I've still been thinking about what she's been saying about that kind of imaginative bodily representation across these fiber optic cables. I know that Michael Dessen is here, and he and I have also talked a bit about what it would be like to work with a visual artist that can manipulate in real time avatars of some sort, visual avatars. So I'm hoping that becomes a bit more of a reality.
Thank you all so much. We have exactly 1 minute left. And I don't know that we have enough time for another question, unless Vanessa, you think that you have maybe like a 7-second question.
It might be a little bit longer, but I can just basically say what it's actually a question for Sophie about bringing forth Benveniste and Derrida, who were both Sephardim. And I think that one of the things that would be really interesting to look at is to decolonize these Sephardi theorists and look at them through the Jewish materials that they've come from, which is part of, I'm actually working on this, but I'm always interested in when people bring forth these theorists that actually come from very traditional societies, but that then appear as French. So I'd love to hear what you have to say about that.
I will do this very quickly. Actually, I have very limited knowledge on those backgrounds of both theorists. That's a very, very interesting input, and I will absolutely love to look into that. And I'd be really happy if you also want to, I don't know, share some more information with me via email or in the chat, wherever. I'd be fascinated.
My email in the chat. Yeah.
Great. Thanks.
Fantastic. That's actually a really great ending place. Thank you to all of the presenters for these wonderful, thought-provoking presentations, and we look forward to our next panel. Thank you.